Let's get out our 10 history books, learn a little bit more about the Cherokee tribe. On page 29 is where you'll need to be. And the first part is a review. It's called The Real People. The Cherokee was one of the largest Indian tribes in the southeastern part of North America. They called themselves real people. They lived in a land of mountains covered by forests. The Cherokee tribe was divided into towns of about 500 people each. They built a 7-sided temple in the center of each town. We talked about that before. The Cherokee had plenty of food most of the year. Many birds and animals lived in the forest. Fruits, nuts, and berries grew everywhere. The Cherokee men hunted and fished to provide food for their families. They hunted deer with a bow and arrows. They killed birds and small animals with a dart shot from a blowgun. That's what that Indian's doing there. They fished with a hook and a line or a spear. And sometimes they caught fish in traps. Remember the fish traps where they would build it out of they would weave it out of some kind of plants like reeds, and it would go in and out and out and in. And then they would take this little basket and they'd put it at in the creek where there would be a little waterfall, and the fish would fall into the basket and couldn't get out again. All right, the next page. The Cherokee were good farmers. The men cleared the land and the women planted the crops. They grew 3 kinds of corn. They also planted beans, squash, pumpkins, sunflowers, and tobacco. The women and children gathered wild crab apples, persimmons, several kinds of berries, grapes, nuts, and other things to add to their food supply. The Cherokee Indians were careful in their use of natural resources. They did not like to waste things. They did not kill animals unless they needed them for food or clothing. The Cherokee learned to make medicines from plants. One of their medicines contained a drug that is much like aspirin that we use today. And there's a picture of a Cherokee man, and he is kind of scaring away all the birds who are trying to eat the corn crop. And some things just never change. Okay, on page 31. In the summer, Cherokee Indians wore few clothes. In colder weather, the men and boys wore leggings and sleeveless shirts. The women and girls wore skirts and capes. Everyone wore moccasins. The women made all these clothes from deerskin. Okay, so they wore deerskin. A Cherokee family often had 2 houses. The main house looked much like this one in the picture. The walls were made of poles. Stems of cane plants were woven in and out among the poles. Wet clay was then dried over the canes, and when the clay dried, it looked kind of like plaster. The roof was covered with bark. The other house was small. It was partly underground, and it had a fire pit in the center and beds around the edge. The family slept inside it for the winter. So these were the Indians that had 2 houses, a summer house and a winter house. And let's look at that picture on the bottom of page 31. You can see that in the summer house there are only 3 walls. There are not 4. It's because if you live in Alabama, Georgia, in that area in the summertime, it is very hot. The weather is hot. It's hot and it's humid. And so they didn't need that 4th wall. They only needed 3. And they put that way they could easily cook outside. And of course they slept on the inside, or sometimes they just slept out in the open. It was made with poles, up and down poles, and then they would weave canes in and out and put the plaster or the clay, which would make kind of a hard surface on the outside. It would rain. When it would rain it away if it was very rainy, but they would just plaster it back up again. And then they had the winter house, and it was small. And it had 4 sides because it had a fire pit in the center. And everybody slept there, grandmas, grandpas, uncles, aunts, kids, dads, moms, whatever. And they all slept around the campfire. And of course, they had no furniture. They didn't have furniture per se like we do. So they slept on the floor, usually on some kind of a skin of some kind. They wrapped up in skins. We learned also that they didn't wear much for clothes in the summertime, and in the wintertime, they wore skins of deer. So deer skins were necessary. So lots of times when they would kill a deer, they would always be sure to save the skin. It wasn't like they could throw the skin away, even though it was a lot of work to take the meat off the skin and get the skin separate. They kept all skins so that they could use them for their clothes. All right, let's look at the next page. The Indians enjoyed playing games. The Cherokee men played a game they called Little Brother to War. They were very serious about this game. It was much like a game played today called lacrosse. This game was played with a little ball, and it was made out of hair covered with skin, and each player had 2 sticks with a net on the end. Each player they used the sticks to get the ball through goals at the end of the field. The first team to make a certain number of goals was the winner. They usually played until one team got 12 goals. A game often lasted for several hours. This game was very rough. Each player had from 75 to 100 players. The players used their sticks to hit the members of the other team as well as to hit the ball. They also kicked and tackled one another. Many players were hurt during this game, and some even were killed. So this was not just a fun game. This was a serious game. Oh, my. So you see the sticks with the net at the end, kind of a net-like thing, and the hairball that they're trying to capture and throw with capture it with their net and then throw it. So Little Brother to War was their favorite game, but it was not really much of a fun game. It seems like to me. It seems like I don't think I'd want to play something much simpler than that. All right, so let's go back and learn what we need to review what we need to know about this Cherokee tribe. First of all, they lived in the southeast. They lived in villages of 500, and they built a temple in the middle of each little village. These were the Indians that hunted with a blowed gun or blowed dart. Now, I guess blowgun is what they say, and they shoot darts. There we go. They had fish traps. They sometimes fished with a hook. And, of course, the hooks were not made out of metal, but they fished with a hook, or they fished with the spears. They hunted with bows and arrows. They did not move. Once they were situated and once they were where they wanted to be, they built their summer house and their winter house, and they stayed there their entire lives. They did not go from place to place to place, which allowed them the luxury of having a garden. And they grew big gardens and good gardens, and so they planted their beans and their squash and their corn in their gardens. And so because of that, and because it's a place for lots of natural resources. There's many kinds of berries and nuts and fruits that grow wild in that area because it is a warm area. And so between all of their gathering and all of their growing in the gardens, they had much to eat. They were not an Indian who spent any time in starvation because they always had enough. On the page 31, you can see their 2 houses. Their summer house was big. They spent most of their time outside, of course, but they would sleep on the inside if it was rainy or something like that. And their winter house was small, because it was easier to heat, just like it's easier to heat a small room than it is to heat a whole gigantic room. You can imagine in our classroom, it would be easier to heat just one classroom, but if we opened up all the doors, we had to heat all the halls and everyone else's classrooms, it would take a lot longer. So their winter house was quite small. They slept together around a fire, and they slept on some kind of skins. And all right, the next page was talking about the little brother to war, the crazy game that they played with a hairball and a stick with a net on the end of it. But to them, that was fun. And lots of big numbers on it, like 100 people on each team. So that was a big number of people playing. And it lasted maybe for hours. But it was a pretty rough game because if you didn't get the ball and you got mad, you go ahead and hit your friend over there with the stick. And that doesn't sound like a very, very good idea. All right. There is the Cherokee tribe. Remember, they lived in the southeast. They wore skins. They were not hungry people. They were well-fed people. They had a lot of interesting weapons. And they had a summer house and a winter house. All right. So that's what you need to know about the Cherokee tribe. And the next time we're together, we'll talk about the next tribe, the Ojibwas. Okay? Bye-bye.